and welcome to another episode, the 31st episode. This is our 31st episode of Tech Bugs and Rock and Roll with me, your host, Mark Rendell. And this week, standing in for Dylan Beattie because he's on a train, we have Kevlin Henney. Everybody, huge welcomes to Kevlin Henney. That it does feel. Oh, and Dylan saying hello from somewhere. I was somewhere between Berwick upon Tweed and Edinburgh on like Monday last week, I think. So yes.
I mean, you said that in a way that's very, very mysterious. It's like you were somewhere between Edinburgh and Derby.
Yes,
is this
on
like
a train.
MI5 mission you can't reveal? Or
I can't tell you any more than that, or I would
GPS interference. Yeah,
I'd have to disappear
I'm
you.
Yeah, well, that's easy on this platform. You can just
yes.
I'm all right. I'm enjoying the absence of good weather that we're having today.
Yes.
So just sort of enjoying the summer such as it is, and actually trying to do some work, but only up to a point. Yeah.
You've been conferencing much lately?
Oh no, I'm just conferencing. I haven't done anything for a few weeks, so I'm going to throw myself back into it.
It sort of slows down in July and August, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the Copenhagen Fest later this month, I'm not involved in, because it kind of collides. I still technically I have two kids at home.
Yes,
kind of. It's just that this is the last time that's kind of going to happen. So I thought, you know what, I'm not going to do that. Sort of carelessly losing one to somewhere up north.
I'm actually taking mine with me for this one to Copenhagen, because I too am losing one. Hopefully up north, if they get the university they want. But they're coming with me.
Yeah. Well, I'm losing one slightly kind of over towards Midlands somewhere, and the other one is going back up north. He's graduated and now has a job, so there's no more summer holidays. So yeah. Wow. But the idea of dragging them off to Denmark kind of half has an appeal, but it's not going to work out this time. But no, I think you all should have a good time.
Yeah, well, Willow's 18 and therefore old enough to kind of have a hotel room booked in their name and stuff. And they can go out to what's the place called? Begins with T. Tivoli Gardens.
Tivoli Gardens is fantastic. That is one of those ones you kind of get used. For anybody who's not been there, you kind of get used to the kind of the modern idea of an amusement park and stuff like that. But the one in Copenhagen is like a much older. It's more compact. It's just, I don't know. It's got a slightly different vibe. But yeah, it's good fun.
The theme was theme park. I think that's the thing that's a big difference, because if you're used to places like Disney or Universal or something like that, but even just regular theme parks like Auckland Towers and Thorpe Park and places like that, they still have themed areas and they try to sort of be a theme park. Whereas Tivoli Gardens is an amusement park, and it's just things to do and roller coasters where the theme is it's a roller coaster. And it's in the middle of Copenhagen. Shut up and get on.
Yeah. It's the theme is simplicity, which somehow relates to something that I think we all care about in software. But yeah, it's just like, come on, keep it simple, people. Just do the thing. If you're going to amuse people with roller coasters, just make it a roller coaster and make it a really good one. So yeah, definitely. Yeah. And the fact that you get to look not at when you go up on the high rides, you don't just get to look at more theme park or.
Yes, it's kind of
a boring property beyond the boundary of the theme park. You get to see Copenhagen, which is like absolutely awesome. Yeah,
especially that thing that goes up in the air with the chain swings on it.
Absolutely, which and all the things that go up divided our family in two. And I definitely went up. My older one went up, younger one, and my wife definitely not interested in that. But I'm kind of disappointed. I'm getting a lot of FOMO at the moment because. The one thing I'm not doing today is being in Glasgow. speaking of being in between places, for various reasons, I was going to be in Glasgow. I was going to go to the Science Fiction World Convention, World Science Fiction Convention, Glasgow World.
Oh, I think Eli's at that at the moment.
Eli is indeed at that, and I
Yes.
had a chat with them early this year because we were talking about it, and I was absolutely going to go. And I went to the last Worldcon in the UK, which is 2014. That was in London.
Yeah.
And I went to one in 1987 and one in 1988. Discontinuity there.
Yes.
But you know, I thought, oh, this is absolutely fantastic. That's going to, but unfortunately, I can't. And I realized today, I couldn't travel. So fortunately, I'd made the right call. But it means I can be here. So actually, the universe was working in my favor. But I've got that FOMO. I've got the Developer Fest in Copenhagen FOMO, and I had NDC FOMO as well because again, a lot of things happening at home at the moment. So I had to stick around. So you guys had a really good time at NDC, from what I can tell.
We had the best time. We made music.
I don't want to hear that.
And
I absolutely don't want to hear how good a time you had.
It was, you really missed out. Although actually, that little music venue that we played, we would have struggled to fit one more guitarist on that stage. It was tight.
Too many guitarists. Oh, so actually, you got a new bass, didn't you?
I
between go on. Because I mean, you'd struggle to fit that one there because it's got 5 strings, the new one, hasn't it? I mean, you know, you can't. There's no space for the extra string.
Yes. So this is my new bass. It's headless, which means you can fit it in the overhead bins on aeroplanes. So you can just take it in its gig bag, and then down at the bottom here, I'm trying to work out where everything goes. There we go.
The finish. Love the finish.
Yeah, it is gorgeous.
And how have you got that tuned?
So that is B. So that it's got an extra low string.
You got a low, yeah. Okay.
Because there are 3 songs that we do in Linebreakers. There's Reply Guy and Love Story, weirdly, and Enterprise Waterfall, which are in drop D.
Yeah.
And when I first started, because I started playing with the band after about sort of 3-4 weeks after I started playing bass, and Enterprise Waterfall was one of the first ones that I learned because I love Pink Floyd. And but drop D, it's like I have to retune the thing. Just do a whole other song while I retune. And it was terrifying. Now I can do it fairly quickly. But the problem is it's still a bit of an interruption. And so whenever you see us, we're always doing those 3 songs together so that I don't have to keep constantly reaching.
So basically, we're learning about decoupling here.
Yes, we are. See, it's a valuable lesson. We'll get to talk about this. Lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there are loads of parallels here.
Yeah. And then there's one song which I've been sort of happily playing a 4-string version of, but where the original music calls for a 5-string, which is We Didn't Start the Fire. And so I've now relearned that with the 5-string. And it makes some things much easier to play.
Yeah.
So like E and the octave, if you're playing that on a 4-string, you sort of pluck the open E, and then you have to jump up and hit the 2nd fret on the D string.
Yeah.
Whereas now you can use the 5th fret on the B string and just use the regular octave pattern where your little finger's just in the right place to do octaves all the time. I love it. And it's gorgeous, and it's got a roasted maple neck, and it feels amazing. And so I very briefly, I have 4 basses, but I am going to sell 2 of them to cover this one.
Yeah, I think I kind of have a one sort of, and I think that the rule has been elasticated this year a little bit, but normally a 1 in 1 out rule for guitars, and I kind of broke that a couple of months ago with new guitar. 3 months ago, new guitar. But normally a 1 in 1 out rule. I'm fairly good on clearing out pedals and stuff like that. It's you know, you can't give them all the same love at the same time. There are practical limits to that. And so you know, it's
and the good
definitely not a collector.
This will finally prompt me to create a reverb.com account and sell some of the other things that have gone along the way as well.
Yeah. Well, I've going to say that was going to be my recommendation. Reverb is I've got I've had an account there for a few years, and sometimes I'm kind of quite impressed by how much I've actually sold on. And I wish I could do the same with the rest of my life, in the sense of, avoid hoarding and stuff like that. But no, for some reason, musical instrument stuff I've been very, very good at. Probably because starting it up again was kind of like, okay, this is a new thing. I don't have lots to hoard. So that if only I could do the same with my old laptops and computers, because they're kind of taking
but
up space.
There might be a photo on there that you haven't got on any other device. You can never get rid
of
it.
And I've got to make peace with myself and say there might be, but I don't know, and I would never know. And it's interesting. I had a little bit of a flush of clearing stuff out last year, and going through some old machines. I managed to win some favor with a friend of ours, but not his wife. He's taken to collecting old computers. And I had a couple that were quite unique and, no longer relevant. It's a very early Windows XP touchscreen type thing, but small, and was originally only available in Japan. But I picked it up in a market in Hong Kong when I was there.
So that is sort of a collector's item.
It is, yeah. You can kind of, it's so, and it was quite neat. And I actually did a couple of conferences with it. You turn up with this thing, and it's about this big. So for those of you listening without the benefit of vision, it's kind of, I guess it's probably about 20 centimeters by 15 centimeters, maybe a little bit small. And so, but chunky.
How would it compare to a Nintendo Switch?
Bulkier. It feels bulkier. It's a bit thicker. Right.
Thicker.
It's got a little bit of weight to it, because it actually had it didn't have a solid state drive. Wow. It had a proper spinny drive, and you could plug in a keyboard, and it had it didn't have HDMI. It had a VGA adapter and all the rest of it. And I actually did a couple of conferences with that, partly for the reason I could turn up with a fold-out keyboard that came with it, making sure that I didn't have the Japanese keyboard mappings, which are very confusing, because although you could see it, it was like it was a US mapping, but not quite. So it was neither. It was not one thing nor the other. And it was just like, just slightly off. But it was quite neat. But anyway, I haven't touched it. So I've been going through, okay, what are the things that I can get rid of? I actually had one. Unfortunately, it didn't boot up. It was knackered. It was an old Fujitsu. It was used a Crusoe Corporation chip, transmitter chips, which, for those of you with really long memories, this goes back to the 2000s. But there was a point where Linus Torvalds actually had a job around there, and he was writing stuff for the firmware for this, and it was supposed to be highly optimizing and energy saving and all the rest of it. And actually, it was quite a funky thing. It had it was kind of like, it looks like what was then a netbook, or what became, just after that, such devices was like, oh, it's a netbook and all this kind of stuff. But it was before that. And it was quite neat. And it was, I really quite liked it, but then fell out of use because all the rest of the technology we ended up with a whole load of, whatever pads. And everything suddenly just became a little more solid state, a little bit more lightweight. And then, we hit the Chromebook era and all the rest of it. And that kind of became normal. And that, but this Fujitsu one, really interesting. Unfortunately, the thing didn't boot up. This other thing, which was a Sony, for reference, this other thing, U500, U50, something like that.
Oh, I think I remember those little Sony things.
Yeah, and it was, but it did boot up after over 20 years.
They were like under the Vio name or something, weren't they?
Yeah, it was I think it was, my greatest, I used to use Vios just solidly. I really like that. And then kind of Sony dropped the ball, and then they dropped the line, which was the whole Vio line, which is a real shame. Yeah. But it was the whole thing. But these things were at the edge of what you could do with kind of airflow and lightweight fans at that point. And then Chromebooks came along, and you ended up with a completely different kind of dynamic in that space and people started talking more about cloud storage and all the rest of it. And that kind of whole game shifted. But I have a few devices lying around that are a bit like that, and some really odd bits and pieces, like a keyboard that fits in the palm of your hand and looks like a remote control, but it's actually a full QWERTY keyboard. I kind of got rid of that one last year when I was clearing stuff out. But yeah, so I'm not as good on the clearing out old tech as I am with, you know, cycling through guitar stuff, because I actually I have a kind of rule with myself. I actually need to use it. If I don't use it, then I will get rid of it. Whereas this other stuff I have lying around my office or the attic is just like, who knows? There are no rules for this stuff.
Things. Do you have a box or a container full of old hard disks?
Because
I have a plastic sort of container which I've just moved up into the loft to make some space, which would hold probably a couple of hundred CDs, and it is mostly full of hard disks and various bits of computers that might come in useful if I ever need to go back in time to 1997 and repair a SCSI hard disk. But yes, so if there ever is anything that I absolutely identify as having been on one of those disks, so because part of it is if you're going to dump a computer, then you need to take the hard disk out to destroy it anyway. And so I just go, well, my wife doesn't like the idea that she could lose a precious memory. And so I just go, oh, fine, I'll just put that in the box with the other ones. A saner person than me would have labeled them as I went along, so I knew which hard disks came out of which computer, but I just have to vaguely go based on size. But the mad thing is that the oldest one in there is it's a 3.5-inch disc, so I think it came out of a desktop machine, and it is 500 megabytes.
Oof.
And I haven't got an adapter for it at the moment. I did have a 3.5-inch sort of chunky thing that you just stick it in. So I have no idea what's on there, but I'm guessing it's Windows 98 or maybe Windows 2000.
That could, I mean, whichever one it is, that can make a slight difference. You know, it's but I think the you know, that whole notion of just holding on to stuff, and I've realized that half the storage formats that I used to store stuff in, they're kind of dead formats these days. You know, zip drives, stuff like that, these kinds of things, and it's just. So I'm kind of going with I'm going to figure out properly what I've got, but also actually put some other stuff into the cloud and actually tidy through stuff. But we've done a reasonably good job of starting to get rid of things. You know, I just need to restart that effort. And honestly, when I was younger, I used to be a little bit better at a couple of things. Occasionally, you know, it used to be my wife's laptops or any spare laptop we had. I get my older one. I try and give him the same education I had growing up, which is here's a screwdriver. Try and dismantle this because it's great fun. Don't worry about putting stuff back together again. You know, this is there's just a sheer joy of taking stuff apart. And so that used to be that, and so that used to be quite a good way. And then easily you can extract. Oh, there's the hard drive. There we go. Toss that, destroy it, whatever. But the old stuff. But I've still got. No, we got rid of it last year. There was I do still have a Windows 3.1 machine, which I am going to and it's a luggable. And for those of you who don't know what a luggable is it's like before. Or something? Yeah, exactly. It's one of those. But actually, no, I think it's actually a Toshiba. Compact were famous for this. But before you got laptops, I mean, you needed to have, given the Olympics is currently on, you needed to have kind of weightlifter thighs for these things because they were technically they were portable, but luggable. It was used, but they were definitely not laptops.
The best you could do before somebody invented a thin enough and performant enough LCD screen.
Yeah,
because the luggables had very small. Well, the one that we had at the place where I worked in 1990, it had a CRT. It just had, you know, in the middle. There was like a 3.5-inch disk drive on one side and fans on the other side, and in the middle was this I'm gonna say 7, maybe 8 inches. I think this screen was, and yeah, VGA resolution.
Yeah.
Although
And
actually we
obviously,
had
it was at that point it'd be
a
640
Unix
by
installed on
480
it.
VGA. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
so I
which
think that
Unix?
was probably
SCO Unix?
SCO
Or?
Xenix.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
SCO.
yeah.
The
Yeah.
the Unix for x86.
Yeah, that's right. That was the
Um,
thing. Yeah, no,
as-
I had a compact when I started at one place in the mid-90s. They gave me a compact as a temporary thing. And that we were already into the laptop era. It's just like it's one of those classic ones. You start a job and it's like day one, and it's just like, okay, yeah, we need to give you stuff like logins and a machine. Okay, here's one that everybody else has rejected, or has been passed around the company for the last half decade. And then I got a ThinkPad. But it was but I do still have. So the last year I got rid of one. The Windows 3.1 machine booted up. I've yet to check that Toshiba boots up. If it does, it's going to my friend, and
Right.
I will have to buy his wife here's a bottle for your troubles. As their kids have moved out, they've now got a room that's turning into a museum, a computer museum. But yeah, the Windows 3.1, because one of the things, news items I came across a couple of weeks ago that was doing the rounds post CrowdStrike was Southwest Airlines in the States. Budget airline. Budget airlines are always looking for an excuse to justify their existence. In terms of quality of service, which it's not normally their number one thing. And they didn't have CrowdStrike issues while everybody else was having CrowdStrike issues. And news article I saw doing the rounds was that this because they were running Windows 3.1. Yeah, I mean, it's so old. I mean, yeah, the idea of update, CrowdStrike updates didn't affect us. Why?
Yes,
because they couldn't. I mean, simply they couldn't. There was a later update to that it was still that actually no. They're much more advanced. They don't just use Windows 3.1. They use Windows 95 as well. So that's a half decade difference between those two. But still 20th century, very much 20th century. Not big on internet updates and all the rest of it. But as a strategy, you've got to go like, well, yeah, I kind of half see what you're doing there. But
they only take you 10,000 feet up in the air and then lob you in a direction of another continent or another part of the continent. In the case of Southwest Airlines, you don't need them to be like that on the ball and competent. This is like when you go to see somebody at the NHS and they're tapping away and taking their notes and everything in Internet Explorer 6 in Windows XP in 2024, and you're just like, am I going to get my pills?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a case of it's so fun. There's this whole thing. I kind of do it when I'm sometimes I mention it in my talks, but sometimes I do it when I'm doing workshops. I want to sometimes legacy systems. Let's talk about legacy systems. And one of the classic things, legacy system, you end up being coupled to stuff that you don't control, that typically is old and is not updated. And one of the classic ones I often talk about is Windows XP. People see Windows XP failure screens out in the wild, ATMs and things like that. And I always ask the question, it's just like, okay, so just remember, this is your money, this is infrastructure. Is Windows XP under support? And we go, no, I don't think it is. Right, when did it stop being supported? 2014. We are in the 10-year anniversary. 10-year anniversary of Windows XP not being supported. I mean, it's not the 10-year anniversary of Windows XP. It's of it not being supported.
Yeah,
it is currently
it was supported for 12 years.
Yeah, and it was released 2001. It is very old. We're heading. A whole generation of children has now become adult in that period of time. And so you've actually, the funny thing is, you've now got people entering the workforce who are working on code bases that are older than they are. And that's always, to some extent, been the case, but now it's much more the case because there's a lot more code sitting out there. Who and are running on operating systems that are older than they are, and all the rest of it. But it's just one of these things. It's just like, okay, so every time we go to these conferences and we kind of like, oh, there's the latest release of this, there's the latest, and people are often talking about the bleeding edge. No, there's no blood there. The blood is all at the back end. It's in the long tail. and it's bloody and messy and muddy.
Yes.
And it's
Michael
this
Feathers
stuff.
is covered in the blood.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it was just you're working effectively with legacy code. I mean, it was just sometimes when I recommend books to people, I sometimes I mention a book and I sort of say, I sometimes add a caution. I say, just so you know, this book is not current, or this book's quite old, and I might say, oh yeah, it's got a timeless message. That's really important. Or actually, there are elements of this book that will date it. So unless you're actually interested in software history, you don't need to get it. Just take my word for this is an interesting piece of history. But Michael Feathers working effectively with legacy code is about 20 years old at this point. It's just like, no, that book's good forever, because the very definition of legacy code, if we say, oh yeah, the code in that book's a bit old, yeah, that's the point. You're guaranteed there. But it's the operating system stuff that gets me. I think until about 5 years ago, Orly Airport in Paris used Windows 3. 3.1, 3 or 3.1. They might have used 3.0, but I think it was 3.11 for work groups, to be fair.
Yes, the one with free WinSock that got Microsoft sued. Yeah.
Back in the days when certain things were, all the court cases people used to have are quite funny, and I'm sure people are thinking that about the stuff we have now. But it's just some of this stuff is quite frightening, because you and I are talking about this stuff because we were there the first time. What's worrying is that people are still using this stuff, and we know that it's not secure. It's all this, that, and the other. It's just like, oh my god, this is frightening. So it's when I boot up these old machines and I'm looking, oh yeah, I remember that Windows 2000 boot screen, or I've got this is a bit of a Vista moment, not so good, and stuff. And looking back at this stuff, it's just like, yeah, this is old machines lying around Kevlin's office. This should not be what whole companies are actually based on. But let alone national infrastructure.
You just made me think, though, because there's been a lot of these ransomware attacks in the States, and actually that's why you put CrowdStrike on your machines, is because you don't want the ransomware coming and encrypting all your files. But I just wonder, because you see they hit a lot of hospitals and they hit a lot of manufacturing, and they also were hitting airlines. And I just wonder if they're kind of like going, just find the Windows 2000 or the Windows XP box and use any of the thousands of vulnerabilities that have been discovered there. And then you can get root access to that machine, and then you can go on your merry way and find the Active Directory servers and everything.
It's one of those. It's definitely one of those things that I think CrowdStrike does. The software does solve a genuine problem, but the real problem is most of these things are based on old technology that is hugely vulnerable, and it's a case of like. And I always think that's an interesting measure. It's like, well, you should be able to upgrade. When an organization says, no, we can't upgrade, it's just like, okay, now you're telling me something that is actually scary, because if you're not able to upgrade, what are your dependencies? We have no idea. And you say, well, this is your business. And that kind of, there's an interesting kind of like paradox there that has not been acknowledged. I think a lot of these companies, and we have it with, you mentioned NHS, every time I see somebody using medical, but also the travel industry is built on, strings and string and sealing wax. The back end is an Amadeus system running on, and it's just like, all respect to that, but it's been, the Amadeus system, all the rest of it holds the whole industry back. I mean, I love it when people say, oh yeah, but this enables it. It's not an enabler. It's the greatest source of friction that they have, the inability to move on. And you get it with old banks. With one bank, my main bank, it took them about 8 years to resolve the fact that I'd moved house. It's just like, you've got this data. It's not just that your data is not normalized. Oh no, that's assuming that it's in what normalization is something that we often talk about as being nice to have. No, you've got bits of database and old stuff floating around, and there's probably my address is stored in a fridge somewhere as well. And it was just a case of like, no, Kevlin, Mr. Henney, sorry, we've got this as your current address, and that's the address you just told me. Yes, it is, but I've also got a piece of paper back when they printed this stuff. I've got a piece, and so this was only resolved about 8 years ago. And I said, I've got a piece of paper here that's got my old address on it. So somewhere in your myriad of software systems and old databases, you have there's something that holds and it's not been updated.
Yeah. And it's probably an access database on somebody's Windows 95 desktop machine.
Yeah, and the only reason that it happens intermittently is because sometimes that machine has to shut down, and it just uses the address from somewhere else. But it feels like that. And we've had this problem with as a family. We went on holiday. We went and looked at spaceships. We went to Florida last month. So that was just awesome. But we went to Kennedy Space Center. But the whole thing is there's four of us, and in theory, we've all got BA accounts, and it's just like, okay, we've got that. So we're traveling as a family. We're going to try and collect magic BA points on this. And we always get this, that one child, well, neither of them are technically children anymore, but the older one, normally it loses his details at some point. Or it just sort of randomly says, no, I don't know your passport number. It's just like, no, why is it? We always have to enter his passport. It's in his again. And something random normally happens to one of the rest of us. I never have this trouble when I'm traveling alone, but something random. And then occasionally we all have a special meal. Occasionally it loses a meal. And you're sitting there going like, that. The only explanation for that, the erraticness, is you've got this legacy mess. And I do know that British Airways, they've got the usual stat you'd expect from a travel-based company. It's not modern, and there are multiple paths that in theory should take you to the same data, but don't. That should take you the same functionality. But actually, they end up accessing different systems, and there's bits that get updated and you get botched. Obviously, they migrate, and so you get botched migrations occasionally, and certain things get lost. And so you can kind of feel, standing on the outside without looking in, you kind of see these bits and pieces, sort of like, oh yeah, I can't quite tell what's going on. I can't tell your architecture, but it's like a stethoscope to the outside of the system. As a user, you start feeling where the fracture lines are. And where it fails. It's kind of an interesting thing. It's sort of a software archaeology type thing.
It is
armchair archaeology, because you're not getting your hands dirty.
I know of a company in London. I'm not going to name them or say sort of details because I'm not sure how public it is yet. But there is a very old incumbent industry-wide solution to a particular problem, and it is COBOL. It's running on IBM mainframes tucked away in a data center somewhere, and I think there's like multiple failover data centers, but it is still running on those machines that IBM sells, so you can carry on running the software that you should just rewrite. And so this company is going, you could build your own, and then people could use that instead. It's not like it's not a natural monopoly situation. And so they are basically recreating all the functionality of this ancient and legacy solution in .NET and Node.js, and running it in containers on Azure, and just absolutely the performance and the simplicity of the code, the ease of adding new features to it and additional features to it and everything, because it's a pristine, clean code base. And so that's lovely. And I wish them all the luck in the world in displacing the incumbent, because that's never an easy thing to do. And I will be too old in 30 years to remember to do the same thing to them. Because we can feel all smug about our modern architecture and our separation of concerns and our decoupling and everything else. But 30 years of maintenance and feature creep and keeping up with regulations, this is a killer, actually, I found for this is why so much banking and finance, I think, still runs on the old systems, because they employ an army of coders just to keep up with the changes in legislation in terms of what they have to report and how they have to report it. There's no time to add new features.
I think there's a whole thing there that I think is an interesting one. There's an idea I came across a number of years ago. from systems thinker called John Seddon, and he separated out the demand for your work. Okay, so we just simplify it right down, sort of an economics principle of demand, and it's like, I as a developer am supplying work. What is the demand for it? What is the demand? I am sitting here, code in front of me. Why am I here? And the value demand is the one you want. Value demand. Oh yeah, I am adding a new feature. That's what I'm doing.
Yes.
Right. Value demand is the one everybody wants. That's what they want to maximize. That's, if you've got developers, you want your developers to be working as close to 100% value demand as you possibly can. Well, what's the other demand? Oh, that's called failure demand. And it's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
The reason I am sitting in front of this code is because of a problem.
Yeah.
And that problem can be, the most obvious one is I am fixing a bug. Does that add value to the business? No. It's, I mean, you could say having a bug is negative value, so therefore I am adding it.
Yeah.
That's, that's a little bit, that's not quite the way that value works. So I'm restoring what should have been there. So, but it's not just things like fixing bugs. It's unmanaged technical debt. It's, if you're scratching your head, I have no idea how this code works.
Yeah.
I'm going to create a workaround. That's failure. Are you adding a feature? No, you're adding a workaround. So the thing is, we want value demand to be the dominant 100%, but nobody ever analyzes this. They've got armies of developers, as you say, struggling to keep up with legislation, but they've not figured out that change is the most common thing in their system. And they keep being utterly surprised. Oh my goodness, we have to change something else again.
Yes.
As if that was something novel. Oh no, banking regulations have changed. Oh no, we never knew such a thing could ever happen. In centuries of banking, particularly accelerated pace that we've been living in, this is an utter surprise. Oh my goodness,
like
software
a particularly
is updated.
Stupid dog that's consistently surprised by its own farts.
We are stunning. So we don't, it's not a case, you're not going to get this stuff right. You can't get the perfect separation of concerns, but the failure to go like, you know what, maybe there's a thing here. Maybe we need to anticipate this. But instead, what we do is we throw people at it. And so you end up with, and I don't have any hard figures on this, but, just based on a couple of clients where I've walked in and just, sort of visited them often enough, it's just like, it's a case of like, in an 8-hour day, you're lucky if you do, on average, you're lucky if you're doing 1 hour of value demand. Lucky, and most organizations probably don't even get to that. So you've got these battalions of people who are basically, running the Red Queen race. They are running to stand still. And that becomes the problem, is not seeing that and not evaluating. That's the main thing. Now, there's a comment, actually, I just looked at the comments. Steve Brown posted an interesting comment. I think the more concrete an industry, the harder it is for people to recognize the importance of software. We're still stuck in the mode of software being a secondary thing.
Yes.
And I think that is, it's 2024 now. How long has this been true? For a very long time. It turns out we're now at a point where you can actually now get away with saying this, and people don't go, oh my goodness, that you can't say that. That's not true. That a lot of businesses, banks, for example, modern newspapers and so on, is like, you're a software organization and you specialize in delivering this service. You deliver a banking service, but you are effectively a software organization. And they go, no, we're a banking organization that goes back centuries and all the rest of it. It's just like, okay, if I turned off the software tomorrow, how much work could you get done? How would your business fare? What is your backup? You don't have a backup. There is no backup for not having running software.
And every company is a tech company, with the possible exception of WeWork. I think they might be
even
more
then,
of a property company.
But again, it's like McDonald's is a property company from that point of view as well. But I remember 20 years ago there was some report that did the rounds, and I remember having this conversation, and it was one of these people, one of these organizations that had done some research, and I put that one in quotes. It was just industry report, white paper type stuff on the fact that, tech is an overhead for an organization. I'm saying that's the attitude that's going to get people into trouble. That's not the way it is. But I remember going into, I worked in the power industry about 30 years ago. Yeah, 30 years ago. About 30 years ago, I worked in the power industry. And exactly, Stephen observed, that industry was dominated by people who were hardware, but we were providing smarter systems, all the rest of it. That was all the value was in the software. But the funny thing is, this is the thing about legacy and how organizations work. It's not just the software, it's the people. And what you had, all the higher ups, the higher up in manager you go, the longer people have been there typically, or longer they've been in the industry. And it means that all the people managing the software people were hardware people. Because because historically the company, it kind of layers up. It's just sort of an inverseness, it kind of, so you end up, it's kind of like, you expected at this point that the managing director was originally responsible for carving silicon out of rock and making chips. And we ended up with one point, a huge inversion, because the new managing director came in, there was a takeover. New managing director came in and was actually the first computing person that actually had qualifications in computer science and stuff like that. And we were just like, oh my goodness, but all the hardware people between the grunts writing the software and the top were really disgruntled, because it was just like, whoa, hang on, this isn't right. But exactly that value system. But it also, if we take this right back and get back to spaceships here, if we go back 60 years, that's 1964.
Yes.
And it's around 1964 that Margaret Hamilton was working at MIT, and she was one of the key people responsible for the Apollo guidance system software, and did crazy things like say, maybe we need fault tolerance, and maybe computers are really important. You got the astronauts at the time going like, no, we can fly to the moon single-handedly, like they're the Wright brothers or something. It's
but no, sort of inventing the whole idea of software as an engineering discipline.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons she gives. She said, at that time, software was seen as I'm going to say second class, but probably third class. People didn't even think of it as a thing. They thought it's all about the hardware. And so it's exactly, and it's exactly that kind of concreteness. Everything up until that point in aviation and in aerospace had been done through grit and hardware. And actually the game was changing. And all of those factors actually played out. In fact, Dylan and I, just pre-pandemic, did a talk. It was, just pre-pandemic, 2019, because that was 50 years after the moon landing. It was on lessons from Apollo, and we, it wasn't all about software. It's stuff we can learn from the hardware people as well as organization. But that was one of the things, and that turnover, that issues is a real problem. And we have this slow rate of change. So here's an interesting thought. So Boeing have been having a bit of a hard time. Basically building aircraft that don't stay in the air type thing, or are not airworthy.
That have to stay in the air because they're not safe to come back.
That kind of thing. Slight issues, and included there was and then there was the what was it, the 787 Max that a few years ago. We had to fix effectively a bad design problem and stability by writing software and working around it. It's just, oh my goodness, it's just absolutely frightening approach. But at the moment, their latest one, unfortunately, in the midst of all this news, there is the elegant but late Boeing Starliner, which is currently docked at the International Space Station. And it's still currently docked. It went up there at the beginning of June. It was supposed to stay for 2 days, wasn't it? Oh no, they were going to stay for a full week. Take in the sights. At least have get shown around the space station. There's current rumors at the moment, noises that they might have to stay up there till next year, and that actually they may be rescued by SpaceX. And now this is kind of interesting
to me, which is in PR terms for SpaceX, that's just Christmas.
Absolutely fantastic. And for Boeing, it's just like, does this hole get any deeper? They're practically in Australia at this point. And that's the whole thing. There's an interesting thing here about rate of progress and the fact that certain things can actually slow down. And although we think of space as kind of exciting and all the rest of it, the rate of progress, the Boeing Starliner is only the sixth vehicle the sixth crewed vehicle that the US have ever launched. In other words, since the early 60s, there have only ever been 6 flight approved space vehicles for
Yes.
for a human crew from the US. And 3 of those were in the 1960s, just to get a sense of how this has slowed down.
The
So,
Apollo program sort of research
Mercury,
and development
Gemini,
phase.
Apollo. Yeah. And then the 1980s, we had the space shuttle.
Space shuttle.
And the space shuttle, and the space shuttle, and the space shuttle. So that was number 4. We had number 4 for a very, very long time. And then there was SpaceX Dragon, and then there's the Boeing Starliner, which is the least successful of these 6, interestingly enough. But it's taken 60 years to get through 6 launch vehicles, but that would give you a 1 per decade view. And it's to recognize that distribution's actually very, very uneven. And their rate of progress, and Boeing have really kind of, it's incredibly bad PR for them, but be great PR for SpaceX and Dragon. But the rate of progress there, it's a classic. A lot of the space stuff is amazingly legacy. And that's the incompatibilities. There are all kinds of interesting things. One of the ones is that the ISS, the Russians and the Americans use different docking rings. So they're not compatible, which is one of the reasons they're going to have those 2 astronauts either have to come back or they have to jettison the Starliner because they've run out of space. They've run out of docking ports. Literally, this isn't your laptop. They've literally run out of docking ports. There's a couple spare on the Russian side, but they're incompatible. And it's just like, if this is the whole case of like, here we are in the 2020s. It's like, didn't we already know this? It's just like standards, people. Standards,
Standards.
Sort of universal, some kind of USB for space,
Yes, but I do wonder if it's inevitable, in the same way that the mammals kind of took over from the dinosaurs. When you've got these big, because Boeing, that's a 100-year-old company, isn't it? And for they've been around for as long as there has been aerospace to be in, and that you do things the way you've always done them because you're Boeing and you're a massively successful company and you've got an insane market cap and blue chip, all that sort of thing. And so you just keep doing things the same way because it's working. But then when somebody comes along with an upstart company and goes, that's a stupid way to do that, we're going to do it this way. And for 10 years, you can dismiss them as, he's just all mouth and trousers. But now, and I don't think you can take a company the size and age of Boeing and retool and retrain to start doing things the way, because people who want to work for startups, who are that kind of, we can do it this quick and dirty way and move fast and break things, and as long as we don't actually kill anybody, we're probably all right, as long as the money keeps flowing. Whereas Boeing, it's like measure for 6 years and then maybe make a provisional cut. And I don't think there's a way back from that.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think there's so much organizational inertia that whenever they do large organizations, whenever they do have these innovations, they are seen as outliers in that sense. And we've got the same kind of thing. Speaking of companies that have been around a long time, we talk about IBM. IBM's a classic example. I mean, it still exists as an entity, but compared to the IBM of a few decades ago, it's a much, much smaller company. And they obviously dropped the ball on a number of things, PC wise, and evolving into certain new spaces. But they've been around forever. That was exactly that, and they couldn't maneuver. And it is this whole notion that sometimes with certain organizations, it's even easy to see the thing that gives you an advantage can actually eventually hold you back. So one organization I saw, I visited, probably about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And one of the things I started talking about legacy systems. So I wanted to find out, let's find out what's kind of holding you guys back. And one of the things was, they sort of described various things, some architectural aspects, workflow, this kind of stuff. And then there was something that was common. They were all working on different systems, so I wasn't expecting to see the same thing. And then there was some convergence. There was a Fortran-based system, And I was just like, you've got a Fortran base. I'm associating these people like high performance number
Fortran.
crunching stuff with C++.
Fortran.
I know the reason I knew these people is it's all C++ and it's Java, JavaScript at the front end, all various database stuff done in Java. A good distribution of technologies. And then there's a whole lot of old Fortran code that was kind of the foundation of the company. And the problem is that's now holding them back. It's the thing that made them a startup once upon a time.
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time, and is now the very thing holding them back. And I've seen that story keeps being repeated. That thing that gave you the advantage, you've got to revisit it, because it's not that it's bad. It's just that you're going to eventually, it's failure demand. You're going to feed the beast, and you're going to feed it humans. You're going to feed it the souls of living developers. And eventually that thing is the thing that gave you the advantage is going to be the thing that slows you down in time. And you've got to recognize that and see it. And that's what a lot of these larger organizations sometimes seem to struggle with. And every now and then they do come out with something radical. I was reminded of this recently. Somebody I know who's retired was talking about a bit of computing history, and they were talking, the DEC Alpha 64-bit chip came out in the early 90s, and they were talking about Open VMS, and I sort of said, actually, I've never been a VMS fan. I used one of those. So I was doing 64-bit. So I put 64-bit on my CV during the 1990s, which was mostly ignored by everybody because they didn't know that you could count higher than 32. They were just excited with moving 16 to 32. And I'm wondering, I got 64-bit porting experience, and it's just like, because I worked on systems that worked across a variety of Unices, including OSF1, which is the one there. Now, what's interesting is the DEC Alpha was this chip. It had a cooling stack on the chip that was kind of like what's that tower in Taipei? It was a very beautiful kind of structure. But it looked like this ridiculous. It's just absolutely crazy. So hot. And it was radical technology. It was groundbreaking. And you think, well done, DEC. DEC were one of those companies that were just no longer with us. Bought by Compaq, if I remember correctly. They were VMS and all VAX, all this kind of stuff. Classic retro stuff. And then suddenly they come out with this. Anyway, I read somebody sent me a link to some stuff a few years ago, and I read the backstory of it. It was a group that were very unpopular with, they broke all of the rules, and they were generally, the management wanted to kill this project as early as possible. They had almost no support. And it's only when it started looking like it might be a good idea that they got any support for it. And so I think that's again another story is where these larger companies do accidentally give birth to these ideas. Either that comes to reshape them, or it gets quashed at an early stage because that's not how we do things.
It's weird because I not really thought about it, but because my first job, I think I started round about my 17th birthday, so 1990. But when you were reading Computer Weekly or whatever, the trade press and everything, and there was DEC, and DEC made machines, and they made chips to put in the machines, and they made the operating systems that went on those chips on those machines. And you also had Silicon Graphics, and you had Sun, and all these essentially kind of like mini computer / high-end workstation manufacturers. And they were having a field day for 20, 30 years because the stuff they were selling for tens of thousands of dollars was so much better. And then in the 90s, Intel kind of went, hang on a minute, we'll go to 64-bit, and then we'll put an extra core in, and then we'll put 4 cores in, and all this sort of stuff. And also GPUs came along, which was so that people could play Quake at faster frame rates, but it was also, you could use them for doing other things. And DEC and Silicon Graphics and Sun and various others, they just dropped like flies. And now we have essentially it's kind of a split culture between x86 and ARM. And the only company I can think of that still does that, making their own chips and making their own computers and making their own software, is Apple.
And even they've dipped in and out of that, to be fair to them, so it's there's this interesting kind of change. Now there's a thing that I was just thinking about. There's this this really interesting piece given 10 years ago, 2014. It's a piece by Rob Smallshire. It's called Predictive Models of Development Teams and the Systems They Build, which is that's not a sexy title, but it's all about it's kind of like, okay, what about the effect of time on legacy code and various things? It's really interesting, and for anybody who's into Conway's Law, this is a really interesting take on it. But it's a lot of it's about legacy systems. But one of the things that Rob does in this is he talks about certain things in software development and their half-lives. So and that's the interesting thing, is it's half-lives rather than mean life, so just to kind of clarify, because we get so used to seeing averages everywhere. It's a half-life. So the interesting thing here is he includes Windows XP as one of the things. He's got a list of things. He's, developers on a particular project have a half-life of about 3 years, and the way to understand that is, if you've been working in the same team for 3 years, look around you, half the people should be different. Typically. Windows XP he lists, and this is what's interesting, is he listed this in 2014, back just when it was going out of support.
Just when it was going.
He said, Windows XP half-life, and he chose that of 4.7 years, so just under 5 years. and it's just like, and I'm thinking, you know what? I don't think he's wrong, because we are now 10 years on, so half-life, half of a half, 25%. We should be seeing now about 25% of the installations that existed based on failure screens that I see. That's probably about right.
And
so
you do see a lot of failure screens.
Exactly. Yeah, it's in my nature. But one of the things he talks about in terms of companies is FTSE 100. He says, and he's listing software things off there, but he's also listing companies. And he says the FTSE 100 has a half-life of around 22 years. So in other words, if you look at the FTSE 100 listing, top 100 trading companies, and you go back 22 years, then 50% of the companies should be different. And it's just like, that's probably, and that's this kind of, that gives you the incumbents, the long-term incumbents, but it also allows for the names that were groundbreaking to make an entry, but it also allows them to become old. It's been a long time since Google was seen as kind of like a fresh young startup with radical innovations and all the rest of it. It's become an institution, and all of these companies. Amazon was originally a very sexy company. These days, it's your IBM. All of this kind of stuff. And so this kind of rate of change allows things to become old, whilst also allowing things to kind of turn over and allow the new stuff in. And there's a sort of inevitability of that. There is some dynamics, whichever technology, whether we're talking space travel, whether we're talking, programming languages, code bases or whatever. And it's just, there's a sort of inevitability to that that seems to recur quite heavily.
You're depressing me, because I'm currently working on a brand new, gorgeously clean code base. I actually did the thing of writing an application and getting it working, and then starting again.
That'll never catch on.
It'll never catch on. It's
I was just referring to the first bit, actually getting something working.
Yes.
But also, this is the old Fred Brooks design one to throw away because you will anyhow.
And the tracer bullet idea, where the tracer bullet doesn't hit anything, it doesn't cause any damage. It's just to show you where to fire the real bullets. But I'm really pleased with this. The architecture I've come up with, which almost certainly already has a Martin Fowler name, but because it's the bit I'm working on at the moment, it's an API and a desktop application, and I'm using Avalonia for the desktop application because it's cross-platform. It runs on Linux as well, and it's also generally very nice to work with. But they recommend reactive UI, which is a kind of version of MVVM, but based on observables.
Okay.
Which is it's really interesting because that's obviously very common in things like React and Redux and Angular and that sort of thing, but you don't see so much of it. You know, it wasn't a thing in the days of WPF. And it's kind of weird because if I was doing this 10 years ago, I would have turned to WPF and gone, I'll just run on Windows and we'll do other versions and whatever. And I would just have used normal model binding with events and all this sort of thing. But seeing the ways you can use observables and kind of just, so you've got a text box on the screen and it's bound to a date. And in the WPF world, you would have to implement a date to string converter, which implemented the iValue converter interface that had two methods, one that takes a date and returns a string, and another that takes a string and returns a date to handle the binding. Whereas when you're doing this with an observable, that's just a .select. It's a map call to say, this way we're binding it, we'll just do this to string and the other way. And it's really, really nice. And so I've kind of gone, well, if that's nice, then can I pick that up and apply it further? And so what I've got is an entirely standalone engine that theoretically will run without the rest of the application. It's got its own services, its own dependency injection domain. It's running entirely, and it has no references to any Avalonia assemblies or reactive UI assemblies. Nice. It doesn't know anything about UI at all. And it exposes observables that the UI can subscribe to, and it exposes observers. So rather than being able to pass in an observable from the front end, I'm quite pleased with how I came up with this logic. So this is why I'm talking about it. Rather than passing an observable in from the front end, which, if you did it wrong, you could end up with something in the back end running on the main thread. But doing it the other way round, saying to this isolated thing, you give me an observer and I will subscribe you to some events, you can make sure that you've put the observe on call in there that runs it on the task dispatcher instead. And yeah, I'm really excited. I'm calling it the engine. And so it's like model, view model.
Does the engine, does that have a capital E?
It does have a capital E.
Excellent.
And so, yeah, so it's MVVME.
Right.
And I think, you know, because I'm actually at the same time, and this is not related at all, but I'm working on a talk that I'm doing at the free meetup on the Tuesday, the week of DevFest in Copenhagen. NDC always do a free meetup, and they said, we accepted your talk, but do it at the meetup instead. And it's called How Simple is as Simple as Possible.
Yeah.
And it's something I've wanted to explore for a while, and a really good way of making yourself actually explore something is to promise to do a talk about it in 3 weeks.
That is, yeah, definitely. So MVVME, I think you know that doesn't roll off the tongue. Call it Move Me. You know.
Yeah, that's good. Move Me.
The Move Me architecture.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so. But I think that whole idea is built. It's kind of interesting thinking sort of historically that there's a lot of ideas in the reactive space.
Yeah.
That you kind of need to cut through some of the noise and some of the misimplementations. But I think I first heard of this stuff like in the 2000s. It was Eric Meyer, who was one of these C# language designers, and he was talking. He was really pushing this. That's a really big
mathematical inverse of IEnumerable, I think, is how he described it at the time.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, like, clever. This is a really and I had stumbled across similar aspects. In other words, what happens if I just take what I always called a sort of always think of as being like an ignorant architecture. So loose coupling is one way. We use words like loose coupling, isolation, all the rest of it. And I was about this idea of like, what if we drive our architecture through 3 very simple principles: ignorance, apathy, and selfishness. And let me be absolutely clear: this is not for people. These are terrible things for people. But when we're going to construct our code, and it's just like ignorance. I don't want to know how you're implemented. I don't want to know your dependencies. I don't want to have to know, and I don't want to have to care. So that's the apathy. Don't give me leaky abstractions. Don't make me have to care about the things I don't have to care about. And then selfishness, which is very much an inversion of control idea, which is just like, anyway, why are we talking about you? This is what I want. So in other words, I'm a piece of code. This is what I want. I don't care what you're going to give me. I'm going to tell you what I want, which is flips the whole thing around and means you end up with much narrower. That kind of philosophy sharpens your interfaces. It narrows things down. And in many cases where people are kind of like, often the way that people build things up in a traditional layered thing is like, well, I'm going to provide these services, then we're going to build on top of it. We're going to provide these services. So it's like, no, turn it around. I want this. This only wants one thing, but I could offer you half a dozen things. No, I only want one thing. I've got an interface, as wide as anything. I want two methods. You could actually just give me two actions, and I'm good. I don't even need an interface. You can pass a Lambda through if you want, and really strip it right back down. And some things they recover a simplicity, and you end up with a really simple flow of like, what does this actually need to know? And it's that idea. It's kind of it's been taking root in little bits. The UI is one place and React and stuff like that, but I think as a general architectural approach, and then you end up with having an engine. As you've got, I remember calling this thing or something not the same as what you're doing, but doing this for a testing tool and an interpreter for a client many years ago was just really paring everything right down and saying, well, everything's a plugin. This is a nano kernel because it's smaller than, and all you do is you want logging, plug it in here. Well, but what, don't we have to? No, you just do this. That's one place. That's it. And suddenly you got this tiny piece of code that seems to be responsible for very simple orchestration, but suddenly you've got an orchestra, and you set out to go busking, and it can be really quite cool because there's something really simple, and there's a sort of separateness to it. There's a kind of nice philosophy to it, and it's kind of very much a hybrid paradigm because you're sitting there going like that. Does this feel functional? Yes, if I squinted it from this angle, but also it's not, because it feels object oriented if I squinted it from that angle, but it also feels like event driven if I look at it from this, and you suddenly end up with like, oh yeah, paradigms are not normalized. In other words, there's no border control between one paradigm and the next. It's, I'm sorry, you can't bring your functional credentials in here. We don't do function. There's no boundary, there's no border control between these things. They blur into one another and they kind of blend. But no, I think that sounds really cool. I don't know anything about Avalonia. That's not my space, but that sounds, if you're coming up with that inspired by that, let's call it the movement architecture. But that's you got 3 weeks in which to kind of like finalize your vision. That's it. It's kind of this is my basic principle. Right, we are way over time actually. I've never knowingly finished on time, so no, I'm glad to help you on that one.
I've run over a lot more than this in the past as well. But no, that was just completely organic conversation, which I really love. It's lovely when it falls out like that and everything just flows. So thank you very much, Kevlin, for joining me on the show. And
thank you very much for inviting me, Mark.
Dylan for the week. And I'm sorry I'm not going to see you in Copenhagen, but...
My FOMO says sorry as well. The rest of me is busy trying to ignore the fact that's going to happen.
But I'm sure I'll see you at some point soon. So take care of yourself, and everyone listening or watching or whatever it is you're doing, take care of yourselves and each other and stay happy. We'll see you again next week. Bye.